Did you imagine that a simple door in a modest apartment building hides behind it a refrigerator filled with human heads? That there is a handsome, calm young man calling his victims to talk? Then he cuts them, drugs them, eats their meat, and he keeps their skulls as if they were souvenirs? This is neither fiction nor a horror movie. It's true. In the heart of Milwaukee, a nightmare of flesh and blood was born. His name, Jeffrey Dahmer. A young man who looked ordinary, rather boring. But he was hiding within himself a long history of pain, oppression, and complex psychological deviance. He was the child who was not loved, so he wanted to own others forever. The teenager who could not find anyone to contain him began to imagine having still, dead, silent bodies. As he grew older, fantasies were no longer enough. A horror series that lasted for years began, in which 17 young men fell, none of whom came out alive. The silence of the child who loves bones. In a modest home in Milwaukee, a blonde-skinned, blue-eyed, alarmingly quiet baby was born on May 21, 1960, named Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. His father, Lionel, was a strict chemist, more interested in science than family. The mother, Joyce, was a fragile woman suffering from severe depression, constantly taking medication, and experiencing bouts of hysteria and tension in front of the young child, who found neither a tender chest nor a caring eye. As a child, Jeffrey wasn't like other kids. He didn't cry much, nor did he laugh. He didn't play with his peers, but sat on the floor for hours looking at the horizon or staring at insects. When he was 4, he watched his father remove the remains of a dead mouse from under the house. His strange relationship with death began. Dahmer's strange hobby grew. He would go out into the forest and collect the bones of dead animals, open their bodies, smell them, and keep their small skulls in a wooden box under his bed. What he was doing was not out of cruelty, but curiosity, he later said. I didn't feel anything then, just an unbridled desire to understand what is inside the body. Adolescence, the specter of loneliness, and the beginning of the attraction to death. In high school, Jeffrey's isolation increased. He becomes calmer, avoids talking to his colleagues, but sometimes shows a sarcastic side of himself, imitates nervous patients, and laughs hysterically in the middle of the classes. At the same time, he began to discover his sexual orientation. He was gay, but in a conservative society like Wisconsin, it wasn't easy to express himself. And from here, perverted fantasies were born. Imagine men lying motionless. Imagine them dead. He imagined himself controlling them. These fantasies were the first indication of what was to come next. The crime that passed silently. In the summer of 1978, after graduating from school, Jeffrey met a young man named Stephen Hicks, who was on his way to a concert. Jeffrey offered to come home with him for beer and music. Indeed, they sat in his room. But when Stephen wanted to leave, panic crept into Dahmer's heart. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. He didn't want the handsome man to leave. He grabbed an iron bat and hit him in the back of the head. The guest fell dead, and the child who was once curious in front of a mouse bone is now a killer. He dismembered the body, burying parts of it in the nearby forest. His secret has not been revealed. This was the first crime in a horror series that lasted more than a decade. After that crime, Dahmer entered a phase of denial and escape. He attended university, then the army, and served in Germany. But he was fired because of his alcoholism. He returned to Milwaukee with no steady job, no hope, and no internal deterrent. During this period, he later admitted that he was fighting a monster inside him who wanted to repeat the experience. The monster is already back, in a more horrific way than before. Apartment number 213, when the residence turns into an altar. From 1987 to 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes began to recur regularly. He frequented gay bars and nightclubs. There, he lured young people, mostly of African or Asian descent, to his apartment under multiple pretexts: money for a photo shoot, a private evening, or even asking for help. Once inside, he would numb them with powerful sleeping pills, then kill them. At first, he was suffocating them. It then evolved into dismemberment and then began to retain some human organs. In one of his confessions, he said, "I wasn't killing because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them forever." He started keeping skulls, hearts, and kidneys in the refrigerator. Some reports even indicated that he cooked and ate the victim's meat along with potatoes or vegetables. He said, "I wanted them to literally become a part of me, to swallow their presence." The terrifying experience, trying to create a zombie. In one crime, Dahmer attempted to carry out a terrifying plan. He drilled a hole in the skull of one of his living victims, pouring hydrochloric acid into it, believing it would make him as obedient as a zombie. But the victim died of pain. Although his experiment failed, he repeated it with other victims without any mercy, fear, or remorse. Suspicions, smell, and the cop who didn't open the fridge. Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbors repeatedly complained about the stench coming out of his apartment. He justified this by spoiled food or the death of his dog. On one occasion, police found a semi-naked, bleeding Asian young man in the hallway outside Jeffrey's apartment. But the latter convinced them that he was just a drunk friend and that he would take care of him. The police believed him. They returned the victim to the apartment. In less than an hour, the victim was dead. The Great Escape, when someone escaped hell. In July 1991, Dahmer met a young man named Tracy Edwards and took him to his apartment. But this time he made a mistake. The young man felt terrified and began to evade. When Jeffrey turned his back, Tracy ran out of the apartment and ran into the street, handcuffed, until he stopped a police patrol. When they returned with him to Dahmer's apartment, it was a shock. Hell number 213, what investigators found. The police entered the apartment, and there they found refrigerator containing human heads, a large pot containing a heart and liver, skulls neatly arranged on shelves, medical instruments, blood-stained towels, a photo album containing photos of victims in horrific situations. One of the investigators said, "We were at a crime scene, but it wasn't ordinary. It was a horror museum." Trial. In court, Jeffrey Dahmer stood calm and composed, admit everything. He said he committed 17 crimes and did not try to evade or justify. His lawyers defended him by saying he was mentally ill, but prosecutors proved he was aware of what he was doing. He was sentenced to 15 life sentences, or 957 years in prison. When the verdict was pronounced, he stood up and said, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope so." Death of the Beast, the end in a dungeon. On the morning of November 28, 1994, while Jeffrey was cleaning the public bathroom inside Columbia Correctional Facility, he was attacked by an inmate named Christopher Scarver. He hit him with an iron pipe until he died. His killer said, "He was laughing at his victims. He was leaving food in the form of organs in his cell. I couldn't stand it." Dahmer died, as he lived, silent, without tears, without screaming. The killer is dead, but the nightmares he left behind are still alive in the minds of those who knew him, the families of his victims, and investigators who saw what was behind closed doors. But the question that remained hanging in the air was Jeffrey Dahmer a monster? Was he born too? Or was it caused by neglect, childhood, illness, and society? Or is what he created still alive, in other places, with different names, with smiling faces, behind closed doors? Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't just a killer. It was a cracked mirror reflecting the worst that neglect, loneliness, and madness could make if left untreated. A child who was not hugged, so he hugged the bodies. A young man who was not understood, so he chose to do what was not understood. His story was a reminder of something terrifying. Monsters don't always come from the dark. Sometimes they live upstairs. She says hello and smiles. Today, his case is taught in psychology, and his name is featured in horror films. But behind all that, there are 17 victims, young people who did not live their dreams. Their lives ended in a smelly apartment at the hands of a man the world refuses to forget. His body is dead, but his story, you will remain, as a warning and echo from the depths of human madness.